The notion of Toronto being a sanctuary city, if you look at it for what it is something that we would buy into as part of those kind of pretty basic values that I talked about earlier on. What it says is that if somebody shows up for a City of Toronto service, so if they show up to use the library, or if they show up to public health to get a vaccination for their children, they're not going to be asked to show their documentation that proves their citizenship. We will say, look, they're a resident of the city. Their immigration status actually doesn't matter in the context of their getting their child vaccinated or using the library, and that it is not consistent with the way we generally do business that you would be asked for your immigration papers. I mean, think about it for a minute. Do we go around, some of you in this room are probably permanent residents of Canada as opposed to citizens. Do we go around saying to people, well, we want you to show us your documentation to show whether you're a citizen or a permanent resident? No, we don't. Now, I'm not condoning the fact that people will enter the country outside of the law, and there are people who've done that over time, and some of them have now lived here for 20 or 25 or 30 years and have had 3 or 4 children here who are Canadians themselves. And I would say that that is a failure of the federal governments over time, of all parties, to sort of decide they were going to do something to allow those people to regularize their documentation because it's a politically explosive issue and nobody's been prepared to sort of deal with it, which would be the sort of fair and appropriate way to address the fact there are people living in our midst who every day perform important functions in the city, working somewhere, doing work for people, and have families that go to school and so forth and so on. But having said that, given that we have those people, are we going to get into a situation where we're going to start to get people to show their documentation that sort of proves what their citizenship is anytime they're wanting to access a city service? And so I guess I would just say I'm comfortable with where we are as a sanctuary city, because I think it sends the message out that, obviously, and I said this in a letter I wrote on refugees today or yesterday to the Minister of Immigration, it is very important to me in the context of even our very open-hearted and open-minded and open-arms approach to refugees in the current global context that due process be followed. We have a system that has worked well for us over time to apply due process to both those who are applying as refugees and to the country, to represent the country's best interests. And I think that has to continue. But at the same time, I think we have to be open-hearted and open-minded with respect to the fact there are people in this city who are here today that we don't want to be. For example, let me give you an even more stark example. Are we going to turn away somebody at a city-operated shelter on a cold night like tonight because we have somehow somebody decides it's in their best interest to ask them to show their papers with regard to their immigration status? Is that a relevant consideration to those people being admitted to a shelter overnight or not? And I would say it's not. They're human beings that are living in the city, and they may be living in a different status or on a different basis than some of the rest of us are, and that should probably be resolved over time, but that it certainly shouldn't affect their access to basic services, which is really what the sanctuary city designation says.